All right, so let's talk about the sourcing issues in supply chain management. Um, so we have make or buy decisions. Basically, it's choosing between obtaining products and services externally. Can get those externally as opposed to producing them internally. So there's a trade-off there. Of course, if you do produce things internally, you have more control over it. You can look into quality standards and so on. And but if you go externally, basically you may get better pricing because someone may be more specialized in that product than you. So it all depends on that. So we will in this class we'll talk about the difference between make or buy and when should we make, when should we buy based on mathematical models. Another sourcing issue is outsourcing. Transfer traditional internal activities and resources to outside vendors. So you could do that. You could ask your vendors, outside vendors, to produce certain things for you that you used to do internally. And again, you will take advantage of efficiency in specialization, hopefully. Company or the vendor that you are working with is hopefully specialized in that process or product, and you will more focus on your core competencies. Okay, so this is what I like to do in my life too. For example, one day my sink was clogged and I tried to fix it myself. I spent an hour or two, couldn't fix it, and then get some Drano and didn't work, and I spent even more hours and went there and get some snake and spent more hours and still didn't work. And overall I ended up with frustration. I spent my hours and my money on Drano and tools like that, and at the end I even had an issue with my fiance because the task was not completed. But the next day I just called a professional company. They charged me $190. I know it's expensive. However, they just fixed the problem in 15 minutes. So sometimes you may think that outsourcing is expensive, but instead of focusing on those things that you're not good at, if I focused on more maybe being a teacher, I could maybe teach extra classes or could make more money with the skill set that I have, right? So that's very important to focus on what you are good at. Let's talk about supply chain risk. So, of course, if you outsource more, then you will have more reliance on your supply chain, which means that you will have more risk because you depend on other people. But at the same time, again, you enjoy their competencies and expertise, and you don't have to worry about the details. And the fewer suppliers increase dependence to your suppliers. That's why if you have only one supplier, you may create a beautiful long-term relationship. However, if there's an issue with their processes, basically your whole system will stuck. So that increases your dependency, and it could increase their leverage over you, that they may not give you discounts anymore because they know that you need them. Vendor reliability and quality risk is important. You gotta again understand how reliable your vendors are. You need to basically have some measures, quality measures, and you need to keep track of how late they are, how often they are late, and then make some statistical analysis to understand their reliability. And of course, political risk and currency risk are another aspect that is important. For example, country X, the currency rate may all of a sudden start going up, and if your suppliers, let's say in Turkey, and if the currency Turkish lira gets more valuable, and what happens is that their labor costs will go up in that country, and then material costs will go up most likely, and that will impact your cost structure because they will try to charge you more money because the currency is more powerful. Or also the tariffs are very important. Taxes are important between countries. So all of a sudden, country X could raise the tariffs for, let's say, European Union or Canada. That could impact the entire supply chain costs. So these are some things that we need to consider when we outsource. All right, so I would like to give you some risk mitigation tactics. Let's say supplier failure to deliver on time it could be one important risk. Basically, you can use multiple suppliers. So if supplier A is not doing well, you can go with supplier B as a backup. So you can have some kind of penalties if they are late, so that will discourage them to deliver late. And you can have more pre-planning about situations. So being uh, prepared is a key thing here. For example, McDonald's planned its supply chain for 6 years before it's opening a restaurant in Russia, and they consider every single part of their operations, basic bakery, meat, chicken, and fish and lettuce, because again, McDonald's is one of the best supply chain, has one of the best supply chain in restaurant business. That's why they can sell a burger for $1.50, and so on. But if your supplier is not delivering right amount, right quantity, right on right time, or right quality, then McDonald's would have a problem. Another one is supplier quality failures. Here you need to have a careful selection of your suppliers. Is very important, and training is important too. You cannot just say that it's not my problem, it's my supplier's problem. No, if your supplier is failing, basically it impacts your performance and you will lose your business too. So you may have some kind of certification or monitoring, also monitoring and certifications for your suppliers. And again, Darden restaurant that we talked about, they place extensive controls, including third-party audits, and they make sure that they reduce this risk. Another issue is, again, outsourcing issue. Tyson Food example here that we have, they took over the chicken farm production in China to mitigate the quality problems. This is more, we call it a vertical integration. Vertical integration. So basically, the company is buying its supplier so that quality issues don't arise. So this could be one thing that you can, you know what, I'm gonna do it myself strategy. So if you have logistics delays or damage, again, you can use multiple transportation modes. You can use air, you can use rail, and so on, maritime, based on, of course, type of product, distance, and quantity, and so on. But this is creating multiple ABCD plans. And Walmart is an example here that they start owning their own tracking fleet, and to make sure that there is no delay due to transportation. And this is especially relevant and sometimes, for example, whenever the oil prices goes up and economy is booming, then you will have higher demand, and then that higher demand for trucking industry leads for trucking companies to negotiate or work for bigger partners. So if you don't want to deal with that issue, don't want to pay higher costs, you may want to have your own fleet and do it in-house. Again, for political risk, you can diversify your countries. You may have some financing strategies as well. You may hold some, let's say, euro and yen and yuan and US dollar based on your operations. So the fluctuations in currencies won't impact you. Or if, let's say, in Japan, if we have a hurricane in Japan, if I cannot produce anything in my facilities in Japan, I may be able to use my facilities in South America and so on. An example here is Hard Rock Cafe. They reduce their political risk by franchising and licensing in other countries, although they own most of the restaurants and casinos in the United States. Some economic risk here. Again, you can have hedging. We talked about this, combat the exchange rate. And we have Honda and Nissan example here. They move out of Japan as the exchange rate for yen makes Japanese made automotive makers expensive because of the higher value of the currency. And I talk about Turkey example too. If the value of the currency increases, basically you will have an issue with your supplier in terms of cost structure. All right, so let's talk about managing the integrated supply chain. Most companies, I would say, focus on local optimization. What they say is that I would like to maximize my profit, right? Maximize my profit. However, if in a supply chain, if every company maximize their own profit, then what happens is that you basically create problem for other actors, because either you ask your suppliers to provide you products cheaper, or you try to charge your customers higher. So that could create for your suppliers or customers to have hard time in doing business. So which would impact your whole supply chain, which will impact the final customer, and you may be impacted by that too. That's why local optimization can create fluctuations. And also this will create we call bullwhip effect. Okay. And some companies order large lots to reduce their shipping and production costs. However, this will increase the inventory holding costs. This would increase the inventory holding costs. Again, if I order larger quantities, basically that will lead to less number of shipments for a given year, and I can have mass productions, and I will start the line and produce the same product and don't interrupt my assembly line. However, I will hold so much inventory that will tie my capital, which can create a problem. All right, so let's talk about shipping systems. We have different modes of transportation. One is trucking. The trucking is the majority of manufactured goods. Majority of manufactured goods are transported via trucking. The reason is that, again, here we have flexibility as an advantage. Basically, inland traffic, you can reach pretty much anywhere with highways and roads using trucks. However, this is expensive because, especially in developed countries, labor cost is very high. You may see on highways they are trying to hire more and more truck drivers. That's one of the biggest problems in the industry in the United States, that trucking jobs are high demand, and people, it's hard to find people. That's why companies pay significantly higher salaries for those truck drivers. But also we know that there is a trend now, since the cost of labor is so high, driverless trucks that could help the cost structure for these companies. All right, so another mode of transportation we have is railroads. Basically, they can carry large loads that will give an advantage in terms of cost, but they have little flexibility. That's why we see more bulk commodities like coal is transported via railroads. There's little flexibility because we don't have railway pretty much everywhere. We have certain lines, and we need to use those. Another mode of transportation is air freight, which is growing very, very fast. And the main reasons are, it is fast to reach from point A to point B, and flexible for light loads. Flexible for light loads, and we see value-added products are high value-added products are transported mostly with air freight. especially the time-sensitive ones. But it may be expensive based on the amount. Of course, it can get very expensive, ton miles wise. Waterways is probably the cheapest mode of transportation. However, it is slow. It is not that easy to move on water fast. That's why this is great for bulky, low value cargo. Bulky, low value cargo. So it's great for that kind of cargo. And we have pipelines. This is more used for oil, gas, and other chemical products. And the reason is that, again, this is cheaper. Initial investment is quite high, but once you have that, it is cheap in terms of variable cost, and also safe for this kind of hazardous commodities. But new trend with globalization is combining multimodal transportation. That's why we see multimodal hubs. Basically, if you go to big ports, you see ships are coming in, you have pipelines, you have for the oil tankers, you have railways basically, and trucking companies. So they integrate pretty much all the mode of transportation, modes of transportation in one hub. So again, this combines multiple modes of transportation, and very common in international shipments. So you may see some big ships arrive to Los Angeles Long Beach port and then transfer to railway to go to say Chicago or Midland United States, and then from that hub you may have trucking to go to individual locations. And the most common way of transporting these goods are standardized containers. Containers are very common, and their use is going higher and higher. We have 20-foot and 40-foot containers that will help us to carry these. So it's important to talk about distribution management, and we will go into each of these throughout the semester. But one of the most important components of a supply chain is a distribution management. So here you can see I can increase my number of facilities in this example from 1 to 5, even I can go further. And what happens is that my response time is gonna go down fast, and then it will start going down slower. So again, this slope here, if you look at the slope here, is higher than really slope over here. So that's why we need to figure out how much is so much, how many facilities is too many. And if you think about other costs, we have facility cost. Of course, the more facilities I have, I need to spend more money on my facilities, and my transportation costs will decrease until a certain limit. But if I have way too many facilities, I will have so many handling, so that it will start going up, and my inventory costs will go up, because the more facilities I have, the more replenishment I will have, more storage I will allocate for this inventory. And overall, the lowest cost is a point where when I add up these 3 different costs, wherever they're lower, that's the point where is my optimal solution. And it may not be that easy to find. As you see here, these are nonlinear equations, but we will work on some of those examples and case studies, how to calculate that lowest cost in this class. All right, so as we talked about, the goal of a company is to maximize their shareholders' wealth, and to do that, we need to maximize our profit. And you maximize your profit by finding revenue minus expenses. So whenever the difference between those two is greatest, that's your best solution. For this example, 4 is the best solution. Of course, I need to run the numbers, model for different numbers. Ethics and sustainable supply chain management is very important. Because many people talk about only monetary aspect, but we need to consider social aspects and also environmental aspects, because without really understanding how much harm we are creating for our environment or other suppliers or citizens and so on, we cannot really have a long-term success. We may be able to benefit having unethical behaviors or not considering supply chain short run, but long term it will create us a problems. So another thing I would like to talk about in supply chain management, this is again an introductory presentation. We will dig into each of these components. We will talk about distribution networks, the second module. We have production, which is our third module. And in my fourth module, I will talk about inventory management. And finally, in our last module, we'll talk about demand forecasting. So we'll focus on different parts of supply chain. But this is, again, high level. I would like to talk about what supply chain management, what are the issues and advantages and things like that. So establishing sustainability in supply chain, we need to think about return or reverse logistics too. So many people do ignore the fact that when you sell the products, you need to also consider the returns, because that could get as big as your sales. So you cannot just consider, okay, you cannot see this as a one-way street, because if my return process is not efficient, again, you will create unhappy customers. And as you know, supply chain management, your goal is to have a competitive advantage and also satisfy your ultimate customer. Here we have closed loop supply chain. It's a proactive design of a supply chain that tries to optimize all forward and reverse flows. That's our goal, and prepares for returns prior to product introduction. So let's look at measuring supply chain performance. Again, as managers, you guys are or will be a manager in your companies, we need to measure the performance. Again, if you cannot measure something, you cannot understand whether you are doing well or bad. So one important measure is assets committed to inventory. So how much assets am I committing to my inventory? So I calculate here percentage invested in my inventory. So my numerator is average inventory investment. How much money on average do I invest in my inventory? Divide by my total assets. Okay, my total assets. For example, if you look at the data for Home Depot, looks like they have $11.4 billion on average inventory. And this is, again, snapshot of one particular time. And their total assets is $44.4 billion. So if I calculate my percentage invested in inventory, I would divide my average inventory, which is 11.4 billion, divided by total assets that I have in this company, which is $44.4 billion. And this would give you around 25.7%. Again, you cannot just say this is good or bad. You need to look at your competitors. And if you can have the same profit with less inventory, of course, that's the best, right? 25.7, let's say my competitor loss is doing 20%. That means that I am spending tying extra 5.7% capital on my inventory, which is unnecessary, right? If I can generate the same, I'm assuming I can generate the same profit over time, why do I store all those billions of dollars? I would rather invest that money into something else and generate money out of my money. That's That's the goal, right? That's the opportunity cost. So let's look at some examples here. For example, in manufacturing industry in the United States, on average, they are tying 15% of their capital in terms of assets in inventories. But Toyota here, you see 5%. So Toyota is, based on this measure, doing better. Of course, we need to look at all different measures, but in terms of inventory management, looks like they are doing pretty well. And if you look at the wholesale industry, it looks like, of course, it's wholesale, you have higher inventory, and because that's how you make money pretty much. But the Coca-Cola has 2.9%, and that means that they have very, very low inventory in comparison to the total assets that they have. McDonald's, we talked about it, 0.05 in comparison to industry average of 2.9. Why this is low? Because it's restaurant business. These are perishable items. You cannot just store lettuce for months, right? So this is important to have low, but again, having, for example, 3% here would be defined probably unsuccessful. But in manufacturing, if you have 3% or 5%, Toyota case is really good. So that's why, as I say, it depends on your competitors. It depends on your industry. Again, you look at Home Depot, looks like slightly doing better than the industry average. So next slide, I would like to talk about measuring supply chain performance in terms of inventory turnover, or in other words, this means that how many times a company's inventory is sold and replaced over 1 year. How many times do I replace my my inventory in a year? All right, so the formula here is cost of goods sold divided by average inventory investment. Average inventory investment. All right, so let's look at an example in the next slide. So here I have an example from PepsiCo's income statement, and their revenue is $32.5 billion. Cost of goods sold is $14.2 billion. And you can see their inventory. Again, we have different types of inventories. Good to introduce these concepts. I have raw material inventory, which is, again, it's raw. I have work in process inventory. I start working on it. I'm not done yet. And finished good inventory, which I complete my product. I'm waiting my customers to buy it or consume it. So looks like if you add up these three different types of inventory, PepsiCo has $1.69 billion of inventory. So their inventory turnover rate would be their cost of goods sold, which is right here, right? $14.2 billion divided by their inventory, which is $1.69 billion. And if you do this, you will get roughly 8.4. So that means that, I say 8. That means that in a given year, PepsiCo replaces its inventory 8 times. Or in other words, if you divide 365 days by 8, let's see. Excuse me. I have allergies, so sorry for my voice and my coughing. So 365 divided by 6 would be what? 360, 180, 90, 45, 45 something. So every 45 days, basically, they are replacing their inventory all the time, throughout their all inventory. So that's kind of interesting information, how fast their turnover is. Again, I would like to share with you some companies here. In food and beverage retail, I see McDonald's is pretty fast. They turn over their inventory 112 times. That means that every 3 days or so, they completely change the inventory. And manufacturing sector, I see Nissan here that 150, which means that every 2 days they get new set of inventory. That's unbelievable. So another thing is important here as a measure is weeks of supply, and here we divide average inventory investment by annual cost of goods sold, divide by 52 weeks. For example, let's give an example. For PepsiCo, we know that their inventory investment is $1.69 billion. Average weekly cost of goods sold, we know that their cost of goods sold is $14.2 billion per year. And if I divide this value by number of weeks, which is 52, that would give me $0.27 billion roughly. And weeks of supply then would be inventory investment, which is 1.69 divided by 0.27. Again, these are dollars and these are billions of dollars. And if I divide this value, I will get 6.19 weeks. That being said, they means that they have on average 6.19 weeks of supply available for them. So this kind of tells them how vulnerable they are to their disruptions or how lean they are at the same time. So this value, if it's low, it's great because it shows efficiency, but at the same time, it shows vulnerability too, especially if you don't have multiple suppliers in multiple locations. Because what if I have an issue, if I have single supplier in Mexico, but if I have a disruption in Mexico for a couple weeks, I may have a problem there. So again, this chapter I just went over supply chain management in high level, and we covered our learning objectives, which are explain the strategic importance of supply chain, explain the issues and opportunities in supply chain, and calculating some performance measures. And this is again high level view. I will go into details throughout this class in terms of as we talked about this introduction, and then module 2 I will be talking about distribution networks. In module 3 I will be talking in details. I will talk about mathematical models in production, and in module 4 we'll be talking about inventory management. And then 5, we will talk about demand forecasting demand. All right, I hope you enjoyed this slide. You have a wonderful day.